And if everybody cooperates, we can do it really quick. But we did, 2 weeks ago, we did 600 people in Charleston in 24 minutes. That's what we need to do. And everybody needs to cooperate. You have to basically run through the photograph. So, thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I was in San Francisco. I was in San Francisco 2.5 weeks ago, and I spent a year in San Francisco, or the better part of a year in San Francisco in 2018, when I tried 3 of the Monsanto cases. And we tried them all in Oakland and San Francisco. Every morning I would go down to the gym in Union Square before going to court. And I went, Union Square in San Francisco is like Fifth Avenue in New York. It has all of the iconic stores in it, the American stores like Bloomingdale's and Macy's and Nordstrom's and Gap and Old Navy and Levi. And it has all the big international brands like De La Valle and Prada and Gucci and Burberry and Ferragamo, Hermes, everything. I went back 2.5 weeks ago, and every one of those stores is shut down and boarded over. It's just acre after acre of plywood. Imagine Fifth Avenue with no stores, just plywood. That's what San Francisco looks like today. And the reason that's happening is because the homeless numbers on the street are so extraordinary that the chaos on the street has made it so nobody wants to shop there. People used to come from Asia and Europe to shop there. Nobody wants it. So all the stores have left. And I saw that, and it was so troubling to me because this is probably the most beautiful city in the United States. And it's ruined. And I started looking at, what causes homelessness. And California, there's 525,000 homeless in the United States. But half of the unsheltered homeless are in California, which only has 12% of the population. Why does California have all those homeless people? I started researching it. My son, Connor, introduced me to a researcher and writer, brilliant writer called Matthew Desmond, who has done all of these major studies on homelessness and focusing in California. My assumption was that homelessness was linked to drug addiction, it's linked to mental illness, to extreme poverty, and that a lot of the homeless people are not from California. That if you, for example, lose your home, you're living in New York, you have to say, well, I don't want to sleep on a grate in the snowstorm, so I'll go to California where there's better weather and where the generosity of San Francisco's social service system is well known to all. So that was I also heard, by the way, that cities like Dallas and Austin, when the police pick up a homeless person on the street, instead of putting him in the local jail, they put him on a bus to San Francisco. I thought that. Anyway, I found out that all those things were untrue. And Desmond went out and actually gave questionnaires to most of the thousands and thousands of homeless people in California. And here's what he found. The people who are homeless in San Francisco are almost all of them from San Francisco. They didn't move there. They became homeless in San Francisco. I also found that it has nothing to do with drug addiction or poverty. West Virginia has a much higher rate of drug addiction, so does Detroit, and of poverty, and yet they don't have homeless problems. What is causing the homelessness in California is housing prices. That's it. And San Francisco has the highest housing prices in the country. And what Desmond says is that epidemic of homelessness and the chaos that it's causing to those cities, that is now happening in San Francisco, is forming a tsunami that is about to sweep across our country. And the reason for that is housing prices are rising so dramatically everywhere. 2 years ago, the average price of a home in this country was $215,000. Today, it's $400,000. 2 years. The interest rates on those homes have gone from 3% to 7%. So that home is now 4, 5, 6, or 7 times what it was 2 years ago. And even 2 years ago, people were having trouble affording that home. I have 7 kids. One of them's 39 years old. He has a house. But the other ones are all between 20 and 32, and none of them are even looking for a house. For them, you know, they're worried about paying their student loan. The idea of owning a home is not, and none of their friends are looking for a home. When I was that age, myself and most of my friends were at least thinking of that in the long term. But today, and part of the promise of the American dream for my generation that was true was that if you worked hard and you played by the rules, you could finance a home. You could have a summer vacation. You could raise a family, and you could put something aside for your retirement. Well, my kids' generation, they don't even consider that that's, and on one job, by the way, one job to the family. My kids' generation, there's nobody who believes that's true. That promise has been broken to that generation of kids. We have let them down. And why are the home prices rising like that? And by the way, home ownership is critical for our communities and our democracy. If you own a home as opposed to renting a home, if you own a home, you care about your schools, you care about the police, you care about your hospital, you show up, you care about the appearance of your property, and you care about your neighbors. But also, you have now an entree into the capitalist system, because if you own a home, you have equity. That means you can borrow money. So if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, an idea for a business, even a little business, you can buy you can mortgage your house, you can buy a sewing machine, or you can bet everything and invest it in a retail establishment or a restaurant. And that's what happened after World War II. The GI Bill made sure that virtually any American who wanted a home could get into a home. And that, because now all of these millions of people suddenly had equity, it triggered the creation of the American middle class, which became the greatest economic generator in the history of mankind. When I was a little boy, our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. We were the biggest exporter in the world. Many years we were a bigger exporter than all other countries combined. And it all started with this broad home ownership. Thomas Jefferson said American democracy is rooted in the control of the landscapes by tens of thousands of independent family and individual owners. Without that, each with a stake in our government. So it's critical to democracy. Now, why are the price of homes rising so precipitously? One is the inflation from all the wars and the $16 trillion lockdown, $8 trillion in wars over the past 20 years, and the politicians are just printing money. And they charge us through a hidden tax called inflation. And everything's inflated, our food, childcare, healthcare, etc. But houses go up more than anything. Why? Here's why. There's 3 giant corporations: BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And those companies, BlackRock has $10 trillion under management. The GDP of California is $3 trillion. And California is the 5th largest economy on Earth. So BlackRock is larger than almost every other nation. And the 3 of those companies own each other, so it's really one big company. Together, those 3 companies own 88% of the S&P 500. They own everything. And now they want to own all the farmland in our country, and they want to own all of the single-family homes. They've made that decision, and they're targeting them. So all of you probably know examples of people who are about to go into escrow or about to put money down on a home or sign a contract, and at the last minute, somebody comes in with a cash offer and takes that home off the table. And who is that person? It turns out it's an LLC with an ambiguous name, and if you follow the breadcrumbs, it will take you back to BlackRock. So the head of BlackRock, the CEO, is a guy called Larry Fink, and he is also on the board of the World Economic Forum. And as you know, the World Economic Forum gathers in Davos every year, the Billionaires Boys Club, to plan what the world looks like for the rest of us. And their plan they call the Great Reset. And when Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, was asked to describe in a sentence what that means, he said, "You will own nothing, but you will be happy." So they're on their way to doing that. We are now, because of this plan, we are now on our way in this country where 60% of the homes in this country, single-family homes, will be owned by corporations within 6 years. And what that means is that your child, your daughter, your son, who's trying to buy a home, they have to compete with BlackRock for the cost of money. And BlackRock is paying less for money than the biggest billionaire in this country. So the best credit rating, BlackRock pays for it less. There's no way that your child can compete against them. Now, I'm running against two presidents who both spent 4 years in office and who are running on the idea, on the claim that they have brought great prosperity to our country. But I travel around this country. Long before I was running for president, I represent clients all over this country who are fighting large corporations whose lives have been injured. I represent today 1,000 families in Columbiana County, Ohio, whose lives were upended by the Norfolk Southern spill. I represent 10,000 families in West Virginia who were poisoned by PFOAs from DuPont, and people all over the country. And I sit at a lot of people's kitchen tables, and I hear the stories, and they're not about prosperity. They're about despair and disintegration, mental health disintegration, emotional and economic disintegration. I talk to elderly people who are cutting their pills into their prescription to make them last through the week so that they can buy food. I talk to people who choose between food and gasoline. I've talked to a young couple sitting in a rental apartment they can no longer afford, listening to a baby cry on their lap and having to wonder whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. They're making choices that we never had to make. The average salary in this country is now $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs, of food, transportation, and housing. That means if you get the bare minimum of food, transportation, and housing, the average American will owe $5,000 at the end of the year. They're not putting money aside. And what are they doing to meet that debt? They're putting it on their credit card. And Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and Chase are charging them 22% interest. If the mafia did that, it would be called loan sharking, and they'd go to prison. But when they do it, those companies, it's just business as usual. And this year, 2 weeks ago, we exceeded for the first time in history $1 trillion of personal credit card debt in this country, $1 trillion. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock, right? So now we're at a war. We said in March, we committed $113 trillion to Ukraine. And that same month, by the way, we cut Medicare in this country we cut 30 million people, 15 million people from Medicare, and we cut 30 million people, 30 million Americans, food stamps from $283 a month to $23 a month. Try feeding yourself on $23 a month. That same month, we gave $113 billion to Ukraine, and the Fed printed $300 billion unanticipated to bail out the Silicon Valley Bank. We have a lot of money in this country when the bankers need it, and when the military-industrial complex needs it. But when people, desperate Americans, need it, there's none left for them. And just to give you an example, a benchmark for what that means, the entire budget of EPA is $12 billion a year. That's all we have for the environment in this country. And yet, we're sending 12 times that to Ukraine, because we sent $113 billion. Biden just now asked for another $24 billion for Ukraine, and Congress, both the Republicans and the Democrats, have said, yeah, we're going to do it. They promised Zelensky when he was here last week, and they said, we will exempt that alone from the budget disputes. So that's the one person who's going to get paid is Zelensky. Now, and this is a war that should have never happened, that the Russians tried twice to settle, and we did not want to settle it. President Biden was asked in March, Mitch McConnell was asked, on March 2022, was asked by a reporter, can we really afford to send all this money to Ukraine, $113 billion? He said at that time, don't worry, it's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to U.S. military contractors, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. And so it's really coming back to our country. Now, so he just admitted that it was just a money laundering scheme for the military-industrial complex. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So they're just doing it in front of us. They're strip mining the wealth from the American people. And by the way, I saw on the Tim Scott on the Republican debate last night said, don't worry, we're not really giving $113 billion to Ukraine. It's a loan. It's a loan. Okay, raise your hand if you think that loan is going to get paid back. Yeah, I don't think so either. But why do we call it a loan? Because everybody knows it's not going to get paid back. Why do we call it a loan? Well, we call it a loan because that allows us to impose conditions on Ukraine. So we've told Ukraine you have to have an austerity program, so you can't take care of the poor in your country. The money's got to go somewhere else. But also, more importantly, you have to sell off all of your national assets, including the farmland. So for 1,000 years, people have been fighting wars over Ukraine's farmland. It's the richest farmland in the world. It is the breadbasket of Europe. People say about that farmland, about Ukraine farm, if you throw a boot on it, it will grow something that's good to eat. It's so rich. And people fight wars over it. Well, we've now imposed a condition on Ukraine that they have to sell all that farmland, which is in the hands of small farmers. They have to sell it on the international market. So in the last 6 months, 28% of Ukraine farmland has been bought by corporations. Who do you think the number one buyer is? BlackRock. Like I say, they're doing it right in front of us. They're strip mining wealth, they're shifting it upward, and they're destroying and bankrupting the American middle class and our values. In COVID, we shut down 3.3 million businesses, like 3.3 local businesses on streets like this. They were all told to shut down, but Amazon got to stay open. And we all got a 2.5-year lesson on how to learn how to use Amazon. And it's wonderful. It's like magic. You just find a picture of something you want on the telephone and you hit a button and the next day it's in your driveway. Who could ask for more? We don't need the local retail. We got Amazon now. So we closed down all the, and by the way, I sued Amazon. Why? Because I wrote a book, not the Fauci book, but another one with Dr. Mercola, criticizing the lockdowns. And Amazon censored it. I'm litigating against Amazon and Elizabeth Warren now because she told them, it's a good thing to censor it. So they're making billions of dollars from a lockdown, and then they're censoring people who are criticizing the lockdown. But what happened? We closed down the local retailers on this street. the guy who pays taxes in this town, and the guy who has a plaque from the Boy Scouts on his wall saying, thank you for supporting us, the local Boy Scout. The guy who employs your son or your daughter in the summertime. The guy who pays for the hockey jerseys and the Little League jerseys for your kids. Those guys are gone. But at least Amazon pays taxes locally here, right? No. But at least they pay federal taxes. You know how much they paid last year? 0. So like I say, they're doing it right in front of us. And you watched that Republican debate last night. Nobody talked about this. Nobody in the Republican Party, nobody in the Democratic Party. They're talking about stuff, all the little issues that keep us fighting each other. They're talking about trans and about gays and about Mexicans and get tough on women and get tough on all guns or whatever it is. It's all of these issues that may be important issues, but they're not the central issue. And it's like jangling the keys and saying, look over here while you're robbing the bank over here. It's a distraction. And when the king and queen look over the wall of their castle and their subjects are all fighting each other, they go back to the party and they pop champagne corks. Because as long as we're all fighting each other, nobody's going over the wall. And what I want to do is stop the fighting and go over the wall and take action. I'm going to say two other things. One thing I saw President Biden. They were talking about last night, everybody was talking about how we need to go into Ukraine and clean it up and fix the Russians, and then we're going to go to war with Mexico, and then we're going to go to war with China. And at that point, the world's going to be a great place. Okay? It's amazing. And then I saw President Biden, when he came back from Vietnam, he went to Hawaii. And he did a 9/11 ceremony in Hawaii. And in that ceremony, he said, the reason they bombed the World Trade Center is because they hate us for our freedoms. That's what George Bush said 20 years ago. They hate us for our freedoms. That is propaganda. It's not true. It's propaganda. And I was on Neil Cavuto the next day, and I said, they didn't bomb the World Trade Center because they hate us for our freedoms. Nobody hates us for our freedoms. And he got all angry at me. And he said, why did they do it? And I said, Osama bin Laden explained why he did it. We put 2 military bases right next to Mecca, their sacred city. And he said he loved America before that. We paid for him and supplied him and partnered with him against the Russians in Afghanistan. We were his heroes. But when we put those military bases in Mecca, we became his enemy, and we got 800 bases around the world. 800, and each one is there to pick a fight with somebody. You know how many, they're talking about how bad the Chinese were last night. You know how many military bases the Chinese have abroad? 1. The Russians, I don't think the Russians have any. We're the one with 800 bases. When I was I talked about about this era of the Great Prosperity when we were the greatest exporter. Everybody, when I was a kid, wanted things that we made in our country. When I went abroad with my dad when I was a kid, strangers would come up to me on the street and try to buy my blue jeans. They wanted American blue jeans. They wanted American transistor radios. They wanted RCA Victrolas. They wanted our cars with the gold standard cars in the world. Most important, they wanted our leadership. They knew the difference between leadership and bullying. They wanted our leadership. They believed in our moral authority. I went in 1964. I went to Poland, which is a communist country, with my father. I was 11 years old, my mother, and 3 of my siblings. the older siblings. And the communists did not want us to go to Poland. My father went at the invitation of a human rights group. The communists tried to black out any public acknowledgement that we were in the country. They blacked us out, any news of our presence there on all the state-owned media, which is all the media in the entire country. And in fact, before we went to Poland, my mother took us shopping in Washington, and we bought clothing and toys for children in a famous orphanage in Warsaw. And for us little kids, it was really, it was wonderful. And we were going to get to bring these desired American products and give them to these children as gifts. When we got to that orphanage, the government had removed all the children because they didn't want them to have any contact with Americans. And then 2 days later, we went to Krakow, to the Cathedral of the Black Madonna, to visit the cardinal, who was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists. He had been tortured. He had been jailed. He had endured the suffering with such dignity and piety, and he had inspired a religious revival in Poland in the Catholic Church. And everybody knew that the moment he died, he was going to be beatified by the Catholic Church. So as little Catholic kids, it was the biggest thrill of our lives that we were going to actually go and meet a real saint. And when we went up the stairs to the Cathedral of the Black Madonna, Krakow Square was empty. This is one of the biggest squares in Europe. It looked like a mile long. We waited 2 hours for him to get ready, and then we met with him for about 90 minutes. And when we walked out of that cathedral, there were 1 million people waiting for us. And they had heard through word of mouth that we were there. The entire city had emptied out and come to the square just to get a glimpse of my dad. My uncle died the year before. There was a sea of people, and we could not move the embassy limousine. So my father pulled us all out of the window, and we stood on top of that limousine, and I signed autographs all afternoon, my little 11-year-old kid with shorty shorts on. And my father gave a speech, and then they started singing to him, and they sang "Sto lat," which means "May you live forever." And then they started singing the Polish national anthem, which was a criminal offense at that time. You weren't allowed to sing it. And the whole crowd sang it again and again and again for hours. And I saw this crowd with tears coming down people's faces, and the electricity and the passion they had just to be near somebody from the United States of America. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. People love us for our freedoms. They hate us because we're doing bad things to them. I went on that trip. My dad took me to Germany, to France, to England, to Greece, and Italy, and the same thing happened everywhere that we went. People loved us for our freedoms. And, we need to look back on that. One of the reasons they loved us is because my uncle had made the commitment not to send any combat troop abroad to die, which he stuck with during his administration. The wars that we've been through have not made us safer in this country. They have not made us more friends. They have not made us more secure. They have made it more dangerous to be American and more unpleasant here and everywhere else in the world. The Chinese are doing what my uncle wanted to do, which is to project economic power abroad rather than military power. And they're eating our lunch because of that. And I'm not, I can tell you something. All those guys on TV who say the Russians want to fight with us, the Chinese do want to bury us. They want to beat us. But they don't want to do it militarily. They want an economic competition. And I am not scared of that. We can beat them in economic competition. I'm going to say one last thing, which is, as I said before, we kicked off the great prosperity in this country, that 50 years that, economists and social scientists, where we became the richest country on earth. We started it with a housing boom. And as soon as I get into office, I'm going to launch another housing boom. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to, first of all, change the tax code. This is going to take legislation, so I can't do it overnight, to make it disadvantageous for big corporations to own tens of thousands of single family. But immediately, I'm going to issue a new class of mortgages for 3% for people, Americans who want to live in a single-family home. I'm going to give the first $500,000 to teachers who can then live near their schools and can afford there. We need to support teachers more than any other, the most important profession. And here's how, and I'm going to do this without raising the federal deficit, which I'm not going to do as president. I'm going to do it by, you know that if you have a rich uncle and he'll co-sign your mortgage, you can get a much better interest rate. Because that bank is basing your interest rate not on your lousy credit score, but on your uncle's great credit score. So I'm going to give everybody a rich uncle called Uncle Sam. And I'm going to finance that by selling Treasury bills at 3% that are tax-free. So the market will pay for it. And I'm going to try to give it to every American who wants. That will bring the average mortgage down to about $1,000 a month. And it will also prompt BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to begin offloading some of their stock because it will no longer be profitable for them, because you will be able to outcompete them. And that issue will solve the homeless problem, and it will also restart the American middle class, because people will finally be able to get equity again. And once you get equity, then nothing can stop the American entrepreneurial spirit, what Franklin Roosevelt called America's industrial genius. People in this country want to work, they believe in this country, they're idealistic about it, but they need to have access to capital, or all the work you do is fruitless. If you don't have access to capital, you are not part of the capitalist system. And I'm going to do something that gives everybody in this country access to capital. Oh, I want to thank all. Listen, I'm going to. The big thing that I'm going to do, the talk that I'm going to do when I get in there, is I'm going to unravel this corrupt merger of state and corporate power. A lot of politicians say that they're going to drain the swamp. And they go in there, President Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, but then he appointed John Bolton to run the NSA. And he appointed Scott Gottlieb, Pfizer's business partner, to run the FDA. And Gottlieb went in there and did an $88 billion favor for Pfizer and left to join Pfizer's board. So, and I believe that President Trump wanted to drain the swamp, but he just didn't know how. I know how to do it, because I brought over 500 lawsuits against these companies. I've sued all of these agencies. I've sued DOT, I've sued FCC, I've sued USDA, I've sued EPA, NIH, CDC, FDA, all of them. And when you sue them, you get a PhD in how to unravel corporate capture. I said, back when I launched this campaign in Boston, I said, you give me a sword and some ground to stand on, and I will win your country back for you. But I can't do that alone. I need your help. I need an army. And what we need all of you to do is to go to Kennedy24.com. We need you to talk to your neighbors. We need to give money if you can, even if it's $5, but at least volunteer. Sign up to volunteer. We've got 200,000 volunteers now, 10 times what any other campaign has. I need you to take a bumper sticker. Don't get me to sign it and then put it in your drawer. Put it on your car. And take a lawn sign, bring it home. talk to people. The best way to talk to people, put a sign out there so that they see it and this campaign becomes visible. And I want to thank all of you, and I look forward to seeing you in a moment in the selfie line. Thank you all very much.
Everybody gonna line up, we're gonna go this way. Make sure, when you line up, make sure you have your phone out and on camera. Cortez brothers, come around the back.